Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly incredible historical event, a story about power, pride, and ultimate protection. We're going to dive deep into the events detailed in Surah Al-Fil, and we're really going to break down exactly how this narrative works, because honestly, it's an absolute masterclass in dramatic contrast. It's this epic situation where the absolute peak of human arrogance comes face to face with an unimaginable divine response.
So how do you stop an unstoppable army? No, really, I want you to just imagine that scenario for a second. Picture a force so devastatingly powerful, so heavily armored, and just so utterly massive that absolutely nobody dares to even stand in its way. Think about the sheer terror of knowing this literal unstoppable machine is marching directly toward your home. How in the world do you counter something that operates completely outside the boundaries of normal warfare?
Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, the unstoppable threat. First up, we have to meet our antagonist, Abraha. He was the ruler of Yemen, and understanding his motivation here is absolutely crucial. See, Abraha built this incredibly magnificent church, and we're not just talking about a nice building. This was a massive architectural ambition. It was specifically designed to completely shift the cultural and spiritual center of gravity of the entire region. He literally wanted to force everyone to visit his new church instead of the Kaaba in Makkah. But the people didn't. They just kept honoring the Kaaba. And this, beautifully, but also terrifyingly, sets up his core motivation, pure, unchecked jealousy.
The way things escalate from there is just incredibly deliberate. It's like watching a powder keg slowly catch fire. First, you have the construction, building this magnificent church in Yemen as a huge monument to his own pride. Second, the psychological shift. When his grand plan completely fails to divert people from the Kaaba, that wounded pride sours into straight-up fury. And third, the physical action, a massive, all-out march toward Makkah. It really shows us exactly how quickly a bruised ego, when it's backed by absolute power, can mobilize into a catastrophic military threat.
And you have to understand, this wasn't just your standard army. This was a massive force led by actual war elephants. To put that into perspective, in the ancient world, war elephants were basically the equivalent of modern-day heavy tanks. They were literally weapons of mass intimidation and destruction. Really grasping the sheer scale here is vital to understanding the stakes of the story. The presence of war elephants meant total, utter annihilation was on its way. Fighting back wasn't just a bad idea, it was physically impossible.
Which brings us right to Section 2, the ultimate surrender.
This is where we hit a huge turning point in how Surah Al-Fil works. The response from the people of Makkah wasn't to frantically build some inadequate defenses or to throw their lives away in a totally meaningless final stand. They just accurately assessed the reality of the situation. There was absolutely no way they could defeat such a powerful force. So they did something profound. They left the matter entirely to Allah and sought His ultimate protection. The narrative brilliantly strips the locals of all physical agency. There's no heroic battlefield clash here. They completely surrendered their own efforts and relied entirely on the true owner of the Kaaba.
And then, the most remarkable thing happens. The lead elephant just refuses to move toward the Kaaba. I mean, wow, this is the exact narrative hinge where the whole story flips. Just sit with that for a second. The ultimate weapon of intimidation, an animal specifically trained for war, suddenly overrides its human commanders and literally halts in its tracks. This totally unstoppable force is stopped not by an opposing army but by a divine command instilled right into the animal itself.
Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds. The winged defenders.
Now, what's really interesting about this contrast is the stark, almost ironic mismatch in weaponry. On one hand, you've got Abraha's massive, terrifying war elephants, literally the absolute pinnacle of earthly, human-directed military might. And on the other hand, flocks of tiny birds carrying baked clay stones. It is the ultimate David and Goliath situation, but magnified exponentially. And this crazy contrast is the core mechanism of how Surah Al-Fil works. It beautifully demonstrates that divine power doesn't have to match human power scale for scale. It just completely, entirely subverts our expectations.
And the actual sequence of defeat? It is swift and it is shocking. Step 1. The lead elephant halts, completely breaking the army's momentum. Step 2. The sky just fills up as flocks of birds arrive. And they aren't armed with iron or fire, but with tiny baked clay stones. Step 3. By Allah's command, these stones strike the army. And the result? This mighty, heavily armored, unstoppable force is completely destroyed. It's a highly targeted,
totally disproportionate response that utterly neutralizes the threat and leaves the sacred Kaaba completely untouched.
All right, let's unpack the aftermath in Section 4, the meaning of Al-Fil.
The imagery used in the surah is incredibly vivid. It states that Allah left them like chewed straw. Let's just dwell on that visual metaphor for a moment. Chewed straw. That doesn't just mean they were defeated in battle. It implies a state of total, absolute, humiliating devastation. Think about it. Something that has been chewed up and spat out is completely drained of its substance, its structure, its dignity. Abraha's massive, prideful plan wasn't just stopped, it was reduced to literally nothing.
So the crucial takeaways here are truly timeless. First off, no earthly power, no matter how massive or intimidating, is greater than Allah's, period. Second, human plotting, even something as perfectly orchestrated as Abraha's mighty plan, can be made to fail utterly in a single instant. Third, divine protection operates way beyond our human imagination. I mean, really, who would have ever thought to use tiny birds against war elephants? And finally, this points directly back to us today. We must trust entirely in Allah. This incredible historical narrative is really a timeless metaphor for having absolute trust in our own lives.
Which leaves us with this final thought for today. Where do you place your trust when facing your own unstoppable forces? You know, we all face overwhelming challenges sometimes, situations where the odds seem massively stacked against us. But the story of Surah Al-Fil reminds us that true power and true protection don't always look the way we expect them to. When our earthly means are totally exhausted, ultimate reliance on the divine is, for sure, the most powerful defense of all. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this deep dive has given you a profound new perspective on this incredible narrative. Catch you next time.